Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to unpack one of the absolute most stunning financial vanishing acts in modern history. We're going to look at the evidence, dig up some hidden code, and track a frantic 192-hour timeline to figure out exactly how a supposedly invincible $32 billion crypto empire just evaporated into thin air. We are mapping out the anatomy of the FTX collapse.
To truly understand the sheer scale of this collapse, we kind of have to pause and look at the empire's absolute peak. I mean, picture this. By early 2022, Sam Bankman-Fried, mostly known as SBF, he wasn't just a CEO. He was treated like a modern-day financial prophet, the undisputed savior of crypto. At barely 30 years old, he had a personal net worth of $26 billion. He controlled FTX, which was the world's second-largest crypto exchange, a titan carrying a staggering $32 billion valuation. The guy was literally rubbing shoulders with global power players, sharing stages with folks like former US President Bill Clinton and former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair. The entire financial world was practically hanging on his every word.
Okay, let's dive into this because the contrast here is just mind-boggling. On the left side, we've got the absolute peak, early 2022, and FTX is everywhere. They're dropping millions on glitzy Super Bowl ads, slapping their logo on the Miami Heat arena. It's the picture of unstoppable momentum, right? But then on the right, that's the shocking reality. From that peak of unmatched power, the whole empire completely imploded. And it didn't take years or even months. It took exactly 192 hours. Literally, just 8 days for this supposedly invincible corporate fortress to be reduced to total bankruptcy with police surrounding its founder's Miami mansion.
So, that brings us to the central mystery of our story today. How in the world did hundreds of billions in user assets simply evaporate? Keep this question in the back of your mind as we go through this. Was this just a legitimate, high-risk genius experiment that suffered a tragic cascading market failure? Or are we looking at a meticulously crafted, multi-billion-dollar Ponzi scheme cloaked in this manipulative disguise of altruism?
Section 1. Genius and Arbitrage.
To figure out how we got here, we really have to go back to the beginning. SBF's origins actually form the foundation of his deeply flawed financial worldview. The story starts at MIT, where SBF, who is the son of Stanford law professors, by the way, spent his college years before landing a super coveted spot at the elite Wall Street quantitative trading firm Jane Street, and this is where his financial philosophy was really forged. At Jane Street, he was taught to look at capital purely through a very specific lens: absolute probability and extreme leverage. It wasn't about the traditional value of assets, and it definitely wasn't about the real people attached to that money. He learned to ruthlessly calculate risk and use massive leverage to multiply his gains. Viewing capital purely as math and probability, well, it strips away the human element of money. And that psychological detachment, that would ultimately pave the way for unprecedented fraud.
And he didn't wait long to apply those ruthless Wall Street lessons to the Wild West of crypto. Back in 2017, SBF spotted this massive loophole in the global cryptocurrency market called the kimchi premium. Basically, he noticed that the price of Bitcoin in Japan and South Korea was significantly higher than the price of Bitcoin back in the United States. So to exploit this, he founded a trading firm called Alameda Research. Think of it like this. It's like buying an apple for $1 in New York and instantly selling that exact same apple for $2 in Tokyo, over and over again. By simply buying Bitcoin cheap in the US and selling it high in Asia, Alameda Research used this cross-border arbitrage to siphon millions of dollars out of the market every single day.
As those millions started rolling in, SBF began to heavily and very publicly associate himself with a philosophy known as effective altruism. He goes on this massive PR offensive, basically claiming that his only motivation for accumulating all this extreme wealth was so he could eventually donate it all to better the world. This philosophy perfectly masked his rapid, aggressive wealth accumulation. I mean, it made him look entirely selfless. And incredibly, it worked. It made the public, the media, and some really savvy investors trust his motives implicitly. It became the ultimate shield for the darkness that was gathering behind closed doors. But here's the thing about arbitrage opportunities. They don't last forever. The markets adapt. SBF needed a bigger stage.
Section 2. The False Zenith.
So in 2019, SBF moved his operations to the sun-soaked Bahamas and founded the FTX exchange. And the rise of FTX was just meteoric. They offered extremely high leverage and incredibly seamless derivative trading that professional traders absolutely loved. Very quickly, FTX started gobbling up competitor market share. The credibility piled up fast, too. They got backing from top-tier venture capital giants like Sequoia Capital and SoftBank. They had A-list celebrities and athletes like Tom Brady shooting endorsement commercials. And then there was SBF himself, famously wandering the halls of Capitol Hill in a t-shirt and cargo shorts. It's a wildly bewildering image, right? A guy in cargo shorts actively lobbying lawmakers, successfully positioning FTX as the very definition of a compliant, safe, and heavily regulated platform.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how deep that illusion went. This is a direct quote from Sequoia Capital, one of the most prestigious venture capital firms on the planet. During a congressional hearing, they flat out declared, SBF is a future trillionaire. Just imagine being so utterly blinded by the hype that you completely look past basic due diligence. The traditional finance world and these elite investors, they didn't see systemic risk, they just saw a generational financial prodigy. That prodigy status seemed totally cemented in 2022. A brutal crypto winter hit the market. Major players like Terra/Luna went to zero, Celsius went bankrupt, Three Arrows Capital collapsed. Panic was spreading like wildfire. But while everyone else was just trying to survive, SBF stepped in. He spent hundreds of millions of dollars bailing out failing firms and buying up bankrupt companies. The media and the industry actually began comparing him directly to JP Morgan, the guy who famously stepped in to save the traditional banking system during the panic of 1907. SBF was hailed as the undisputed savior of crypto. But to understand how the savior became the villain, we really have to look under the hood, because the rot was already spreading deep behind closed doors.
Section 3. The Fatal Code. Now, what's really interesting here is the smoking gun. Deep within the millions of lines of FTX's architecture, there was a specific secret backdoor code written exclusively for his trading firm Alameda Research. It was a flag called Allow Negative. In the trading world, if your account drops below zero, you get margin called and liquidated immediately. It is the absolute ultimate safety net for any financial exchange. But this piece of code, it meant Alameda could run an infinite overdraft. They could go into the negative forever, and the automated system would never, ever liquidate their positions.
So the crucial point is how this code actually played out in reality. It basically functioned as a massive hidden pipeline. Imagine depositing your paycheck into a highly secure bank vault, only to find out the bank manager built a secret, invisible pipe from that vault directly into his own private casino. Step 1. Everyday users deposit their hard-earned funds into the FTX exchange, assuming it's held safely in custody. Step 2, because of that allowed negative backdoor, FTX was secretly funneling those customer deposits directly over to Alameda Research. Step 3, Alameda takes those stolen billions and uses them to gamble on wildly high-risk crypto trades to plug their own massive trading losses and, to buy tens of millions of dollars worth of luxury real estate in the Bahamas for SBF and his inner circle.
To really grasp how they balance their books with a multi-billion-dollar hole, you have to look at the sheer absurdity of their operation. To fill this massive gap on their balance sheet, Alameda relied on a token called FTT. What was FTT? Well, it was a token entirely invented and printed out of thin air by FTX themselves. The internal data showed that a staggering 90% of Alameda's so-called assets were just these printed FTT tokens, with barely 10% being actual real liquid assets. They were literally inventing money to cover the money they stole. It was a colossal left-hand to right-hand bubble just waiting for a pin drop. And in November of 2022, that pin finally dropped.
Section 4. The 8-Day Collapse. This is where the speed of modern digital finance turns into a terrifying nightmare. The dominoes fell with frantic, relentless speed. On November 2nd, the crypto news outlet CoinDesk published a bombshell report, finally ripping the mask off Alameda's completely hollow FTT-backed balance sheet. 4 days later, on November 6th, the CEO of rival exchange Binance, known as CZ, sent a single tweet announcing he was selling all of his FTT tokens due to these revelations. In the modern era, a single social media post can destroy a $32 billion company, and that tweet triggered an absolute tsunami of panic. By November 8th, the massive, chaotic bank run forced FTX to halt all customer withdrawals. Just 3 days after that, on November 11th, with nowhere left to hide, FTX officially filed for bankruptcy protection.
In the midst of all that chaos, the true scale of the betrayal became horrifyingly clear. Over a span of just 72 hours, panicked customers demanded $6 billion in withdrawals. But when everyday people knocked on the door of the exchange they trusted with their life savings, they found out the vaults were completely empty. The money was simply gone. When the dust settled, a man named John J. Ray III was brought in to clean up this monumental mess and act as the liquidator. Keep in mind, this is the exact same man who managed the infamous Enron bankruptcy. He is a seasoned professional who has seen the absolute worst of corporate malfeasance, and his official testimony to the court, Utterly damning. He stated with absolute gravitas, "Never in my career have I seen such a complete failure of corporate controls." Think about that. Even the veteran who dismantled Enron found the internal chaos, the complete lack of record-keeping, and the sheer brazen scale of the fraud at FTX to be entirely unprecedented.
The consequences for the so-called crypto genius were absolute. Sam Bankman-Fried was found guilty on 7 counts of fraud and money laundering. The gavel came down, and he was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison.
As we look back at the rubble of this $32 billion empire, it is absolutely vital to draw the right conclusions. This disaster was not a failure of blockchain technology. It wasn't a failure of the underlying code of cryptocurrencies. It was a tale as old as time. It was a massive failure of human greed. It serves as a stark, historical reminder of exactly what happens when unregulated financial power collides with our willingness to blindly mythologize an individual. Trusting in geniuses without verification, whether that's in crypto or traditional finance, is historically incredibly dangerous.
Which leaves us with this final thought. When a financial empire is fundamentally constructed on a private code backdoor and the blind trust of both the public and elite institutions, we have to ask ourselves, was the FTX collapse really a sudden anomaly, or was it an absolute inevitability that the financial world simply chose to ignore because the illusion was just too profitable? Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Until next time, keep questioning the systems you trust.